It was a little past 4 in the afternoon when I stepped out of the notary's office, the manila envelope pressed against my chest as if it carried my heartbeat. My name is Alana Holden, 72, retired accountant widow and sister to the kindest man who ever lived, Samuel Hart. I had just signed the final papers, confirming that Samuel had left me 3 apartments in Portland and a small house by the coast in Rockaway. The air smelled like salt and sunshine, and for the first time in years, I felt seen again. I wanted to tell my son Jack and his wife Hannah the news, to see their faces light up and imagine them proud of me, grateful, maybe even relieved that we would all be comfortable now. The drive home felt like a daydream. The trees along the road shimmered with a late summer light, and I hummed an old tune Samuel used to whistle when balancing his ledgers. At a red light, I looked down at the envelope on the passenger seat, tracing the seal with my thumb. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was what it represented. Samuel's faith that I could still build a new chapter. I pictured Jack smiling, Hannah hugging me, all of us having dinner together again without the quiet tension that had filled the house lately. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked peaceful. The curtains fluttered, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifted out through the kitchen window. I let myself in quietly, wanting to surprise them. But halfway through the hallway, I heard voices coming from the living room. At first, it was Jack's low murmur, nervous and uncertain. Then Hannah's sharper tone, smooth and deliberate. She was saying something about medical evaluations and paperwork. I leaned closer, thinking maybe she was discussing insurance. Then her words became clear. She said it was easy to prove cognitive decline at my age, that forgetfulness could be documented, and once the papers were filed, guardianship would be granted in a few weeks. Jack's voice trembled. He asked if it was really necessary. Hannah answered that it was for my own good, that I would be well cared for once the accounts were consolidated. I stood still, gripping the wall. My throat felt dry, my pulse hammering in my ears. The words rolled over me like cold water. Guardianship, accounts, confusion. It sounded like they were discussing a stranger, not their mother. Not the woman who had raised Jack alone after his father's death, who had taken care of every bill, every fever, every broken heart. Jack said something softer, that he didn't want to hurt me. Hannah cut him off. She said, if we don't act now, the house will be gone. Once she's declared unfit, we can protect her assets. Protect. That word echoed. I pressed the envelope tighter against my chest, the edges digging into my palm. I could hear the clink of her spoon against her mug as she continued explaining the steps like it was a business deal. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The air felt thick, heavy with betrayal. My own son. My daughter-in-law, the woman I had welcomed like a daughter. I realized they weren't planning for my care. They were planning for my disappearance. The woman they described was fragile, confused, dependent. But that wasn't me. Not yet. Not ever, if I could help it. I straightened my back and smoothed my hair. Then I pushed open the living room door, forcing my face into a smile. The scent of coffee hit me strong and bitter. Jack looked startled, guilt flickering across his face. Hannah's expression didn't change much. She was quick-practiced. I told them I'd just come from the notary, that it had been a productive day. My voice sounded calm, even cheerful, though I could feel my pulse racing. Hannah nodded, politely asked if everything went smoothly. I said yes, that Samuel had always been a man of precision. I watched her eyes shift slightly, calculating. Jack mumbled that he'd make fresh coffee, but his hands shook as he reached for the pot. I sat down, smiling faintly, pretending not to notice. I asked about their day, their plans for the weekend. It felt like acting in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Inside, my mind was already rewriting the script. As they talked, I kept my hand over the envelope resting on my lap, feeling its weight anchor me to reality. I realized that everything I had believed about family might have been built on borrowed trust. Still, I wasn't ready to cry. I wasn't even angry yet. What I felt was a kind of quiet, deep knowing that something inside me had shifted. When I finally excused myself and walked to my room, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was calm, but her eyes had changed. They weren't soft anymore. They were clear, sharp, alive. In that moment, I understood that survival doesn't always start with a scream. Sometimes it begins with silence. I placed the envelope on my nightstand and sat down on the edge of the bed. Outside, the sun dipped lower, throwing long golden lines across the floor. Somewhere in the house, Hannah laughed softly at something Jack said. I listened, memorizing the sound, knowing everything had just become a performance. Then I whispered to the quiet room that I would not be the woman they described. They didn't know it yet, but the person they planned to erase was already gone, replaced by someone they could no longer control. That night, I could not sleep. The sound of the ocean outside my window usually calmed me, but now it only reminded me of how small I felt in a world that had suddenly turned cruel. I turned on the lamp beside my bed and noticed the envelope again, the one that held Samuel's letter. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, and time the scent of his study, the one with the big windows where he used to work late into the night. He had written in his careful, steady handwriting, the same one he used when teaching me how to keep books decades ago. He began with love, telling me how proud he was that I had endured life with quiet grace, after our parents died, after my husband passed, after years of carrying more than my share. Then his tone shifted. He warned me that people change when money enters the room. He wrote that I should trust only those who earn it, not those who demand it. He told me that he had already arranged for his lawyer, Alonzo Pierce, to ensure my safety, and that everything was legally protected until I decided what to do next. He ended by saying that I should remember one thing. Love without respect is not love at all. The words hit me like cold rain. Samuel had always been gentle, but beneath that kindness was a man who saw clearly. He must have sensed something long before I did. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling the sting of tears. He had known that betrayal might come from my own home, and he had tried to warn me. For a long time, I sat there in the glow of the lamp, reading his words over and over. I remembered the years when Jack started asking me to sign papers for his business. Hannah would stand beside him, smiling sweetly, assuring me it was just paperwork to help with taxes. Later, when I asked to review them, she told me I was overthinking, that my mind tired easily. I remembered the day she took over my banking app because it was too confusing, and how my friend slowly stopped calling after she began screening my phone. Each memory fit together now, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to see. At some point, I folded the letter back carefully, as if it were the last fragile piece of him I had left. My tears had smudged the ink in places. The clock on the nightstand read 11:56, though in my head, I heard Samuel's voice correcting me, saying 11:56 p.m. Alana, precision matters. That small memory made me smile even as my heart broke. By morning, I felt different. My grief had shifted into something sharper, something that kept me upright. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "The Record of Truth." It felt almost ceremonial. I began listing every strange moment, every lie, every manipulation that had seemed small at the time. The first entry was about how Hannah always insisted on handling my mail. The second was about Jack taking over the property tax bills and forgetting to show me the receipts. As the ink filled the page, I felt my strength return letter by letter. Later that morning, I called Nancy Reed, my oldest friend. Her voice cracked with emotion when she realized it was me. She said she had tried to visit months ago, but that Hannah told her I was unwell, that I barely remembered people anymore. I closed my eyes and took a breath before telling her the truth. She was quiet for a long moment, then said she always knew something was off. We promised to stay in touch, but to keep our calls brief and quiet. I told her if she didn't hear from me in 10 days, she should go to the police. She agreed without hesitation. That afternoon, the air felt heavy again. I heard Hannah in the kitchen talking on the phone, her tone bright and rehearsed. When she hung up, she came to me with a sweet smile and said she had scheduled a neurological evaluation. She claimed it was routine something to make sure I was healthy and sharp. I knew what she was doing. I could almost see the plan written behind her eyes. I smiled back and told her it was a wonderful idea. My voice didn't shake. Inside, though, I felt something settle into place. If they believed I was losing control, they would lower their guard. I needed that. Sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to let them think you are small. That evening, I walked to the porch as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The sea breeze brushed my face, carrying the faint sound of waves crashing against the rocks. I thought about Samuel again and whispered a quiet thank you. He had given me more than an inheritance. He had given me time to wake up before it was too late. Back inside, I added one more line to my notebook before turning off the light. The line read, "Pretend to sleep. Listen more than you speak. Wait until the 10th day. Then act." I closed the book and placed it under my pillow, feeling the faint hum of the ocean beyond the walls. I knew then that I wasn't the frail old woman they imagined. I was a woman preparing for war, a quiet one, fought with patience, truth, and the kind of strength that only comes when everything you love has been threatened. The house was silent, but I could feel my heartbeat steady again. My survival had already begun. The night before the doctor's visit, I couldn't sleep. The house felt tense, too quiet. Around 11:30, I heard soft footsteps outside my door. I turned off the lamp and listened. Hannah's voice was calm and cold. She told Jack she would mix a sedative into my breakfast tea so I would seem confused. Jack hesitated, but she said it was the only way to solve their money problems. I sat frozen, my heart pounding. When they went silent, I reached for my phone and called Alonzo Pierce. It was close to midnight, but he answered immediately. His voice was calm, steady. He told me to pack essentials and leave the house at once. He said to meet him at the Harbor Inn downtown by 1:15 in the morning. I gathered my wallet documents, Samuel's letter, and my notebook, The Record of Truth. I slipped on a coat and left without a sound. The ocean wind was sharp, carrying the smell of salt and rain. I walked quickly down the street, feeling the weight of every step. When I reached the main road, I hailed a taxi. The driver didn't speak as I stared out at the dark town sliding past the window. At the Harbor Inn, the woman at the desk handed me a key without asking questions. In the room, I sat on the bed, holding the envelope to my chest. The rain began tapping on the glass, and the clock crept toward 1:15. When the knock came, I opened the door to see Alonzo. He told me I was safe. We went over the documents, and at dawn he took me to his office. A notary was waiting. By sunrise, everything Samuel had left was secured in my name. That morning, we filed a police report for attempted elder fraud. The officer listened carefully and called me brave, though I didn't feel brave yet. I felt only tired. But somewhere beneath that exhaustion, strength was starting to build. 3 days later, Alonzo told me Jack and Hannah had filed for guardianship. The hearing was set for the following week. I felt fear, but also clarity. I told him I wanted to face them. The courthouse smelled of rain and old wood. Hannah wore blue and sat with perfect posture. Jack looked pale. Their lawyer described me as unstable and confused, saying I'd wandered off in the night. Then Alonzo rose calm and precise. He presented Samuel's letter, my notarized papers, and a medical evaluation proving I was fully competent. He placed my notebook on the table, each page filled with dates and facts they could not deny. The judge asked if I wanted to speak. I stood and faced Jack. My voice was soft but steady. I told him he hadn't lost his mother. He had sold her. The courtroom went still. Hannah looked away. The judge's voice cut through the silence as she denied their petition. She confirmed my independence and warned that any further interference would bring criminal charges. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps. I felt it warm my face and realized my hands no longer trembled. Alonso offered me a ride, but I chose to walk. I wanted to feel the ground beneath my feet. As I passed the old courthouse gates, I whispered to the wind that this was not revenge. It was justice, quiet and complete. The ocean breeze carried my words away, and I knew that I had reclaimed more than my freedom. I had reclaimed myself. 6 months later, the sea had become my closest companion. Each morning, I opened the windows to the sound of waves breaking against the rocks below the porch. The air carried the scent of salt and driftwood. My brother's house had turned into my sanctuary, a place where time moved gently. I spent my mornings writing for my blog, Sea of Second Chances, where women my age shared stories of survival loss and quiet victories. The words poured out easily, now shaped by calm instead of fear. Nancy visited often, bringing flowers from her garden and laughter that filled the kitchen. She said freedom suited me, that I looked 10 years younger. I told her it was not youth returning, but peace arriving at last. We would sit by the window for hours, listening to the tide come in, talking about ordinary things like recipes and books. Ordinary had become extraordinary. One afternoon, a letter arrived with Jack's handwriting. I held it for a long time before opening it. His words were full of remorse. He admitted what he had done, how greed and fear had twisted his love into something cruel. He said he wished he could start again. I read it twice, feeling both sorrow and relief. That night, I wrote back. I told him I forgave him, but forgiveness did not mean returning to what was broken. I said I wished him peace, but my life now belonged to the sea, to quiet mornings, and to myself. The next evening, I walked along the shore as the sun sank low, painting the horizon in gold and rose. The tide washed around my ankles, cool and alive. In my hands, I carried my old notebook, the record of truth, its pages fluttering in the breeze. I whispered to the water that I was finally free. The waves took my words, carried them away, and for the first time in a long life, I felt completely at home in the silence that followed.